Hello, I'm Daniel Helminiak. I am just amazed to be speaking to you, taking part in the celebration of the release of the Chinese translation of what the Bible really says about homosexuality, and to be able to do this around the world. It's quite amazing. I'm so very grateful to E.E. for the translation she did and the work she did getting this book published, because it makes it available to such a wide audience in a whole other culture, bringing our global community back together. I'm here actually sitting in my office at the University of West Georgia in the Department of Psychology. I'm here as a psychologist. My interest is really the psychology of spirituality. That is the most that I focus my energies on, trying to develop some understanding of the spiritual dimension we as human beings share. This even apart from questions about God and afterlife and those kinds of things, that the fact that we ourselves have within us a dimension that opens us to the universe. I think that's what opens us to God. It's all so much bigger than we, and we are aware that there's a sensitivity that we have. So my work is a psychology of spirituality. I have a doctorate in systematic theology from Boston College, where I worked with Bernard Lonergan, one of the geniuses of the 20th century, and it is what opened my mind to be able to deal with these questions. Later, after teaching systematic theology and spirituality for a number of years as a graduate school of theology, I also earned a PhD, a doctorate in psychology. And my goal then was to put those pieces together, psychology of religion. So my most important works, of course, this new one just coming out called Brain, Consciousness, and God, which is pretty much a summary of my life's work attempting to do spirituality that way. Another most recent book of mine, The Transcended Christian. This perhaps would be a follow-up to what the Bible really says about homosexuality. Like after you've resolved that question, then what do you do? The point I want to make, I wrote this book, the one on the Bible and homosexuality. I wrote this book because I was trying to work out the issues for myself. I'm gay. I realized that after I was ordained. We didn't talk. No one knew anything about those things in those days when I was growing up and even in seminary. And I realized something was going on with me, and I needed to resolve the question. And so studying it on my own, I began resolving it. Back in 1976, John McNeill's book, The Church and the Homosexual, the first thing that I'm aware of that was ever published challenging the traditional teaching. And some of the evidence here was coming from John Boswell. His famous book, Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality, opened up a whole new perspective, giving a historical analysis of what was going on with Christianity through the centuries in the West. And it became really clear, studying John Boswell, Yale University historian, that the Christian tradition was not always condemning of homosexuality. This was a rather recent thing, earliest in the 12th century, but questions had been arising ever since. The Bible study was very difficult trying to understand what was going on there, because there was these traditional understandings. Finally came along then this book by William Countryman, Dirt, Greed, and Sex, which dealt with the chapter 1 of the letter to the Romans in the Christian Testament, the New Testament. That is the longest and the most difficult of the texts. It speaks in a number of sentences, a number of verses, about what is clearly same-sex behavior, men with men. I don't think it's talking about lesbians. There's very little condemnation anywhere in the scripture, no concern about the women. It's a male thing. The basic point of all this was that if you take those texts in the scriptures and put them back into their original historical context, understand them as they were meant when they were written, they are not talking about what we're talking about today. It makes obvious sense if you stop to think. I mean, this was 3,000 years ago. They had no understanding of things the way that we do. And even if you understand those texts for what they're saying in themselves, They do, in one instance, condemn same-sex behavior. It's only between two men that are penetrating each other. That was not because of the nature of sex. It was said in Leviticus. It was said because of the Jewish understanding of how the world should function, how things should fit, the science of the day, if I can say it in those terms. And of course, we understand things so much better in our day. But in the science of the day, that was the one thing that was forbidden. Nothing about women with women, nothing about men doing other things with each other. It was not same-sex behavior in itself across the board that was condemned. Only one act because it violated a Jewish understanding of the way things should be. When these historical understandings are applied to the scriptures, it's absolutely clear in my mind that the Bible is not condemning homosexuality. They weren't even talking about it as we were. And I spent my early years trying to figure those things out. In conscience, I couldn't just go ahead with this without having worked out the issues. And so eventually I did. And I said to myself, this needs to be popularized. Other people need to know what the scholars are saying, what all the scholars know, but it's not coming down to the popular level. So the book, there it is. And now that it could be available in Chinese, that is an amazing gift. I'm so grateful for that. The other point I want to make, I never published a thing, nothing, until I came out. Until I got comfortable with myself, I figured out who I was, began to trust my own heart and mind. It was only then that I was starting to be creative and productive. And for this reason, looking at my own life, that I am so grateful if we can help gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people to be free, to be who they are. And once they're who they are, they will contribute to society in ways that we could never have imagined. And otherwise, so much life is wasted. So many people's lives are wasted. So it was looking at this question, coming out. Why did this happen? How come I got involved in it? Why did John Boswell and John McNeill and Bill Countryman, why were they studying these questions? They didn't actually start with the Bible. I want to make the point that science also contributed in very important ways to our understanding of sexuality. In fact, study of sexuality is so recent that we could say we're just children trying to understand the issue. It wasn't at the earliest until about 1900, in those early 1900 years, that anybody anywhere was studying sexuality. The most famous case, of course, is Sigmund Freud. And much of his theory has sexuality weaved into it. And some people say, he was a sexual pervert. All he could think about was sex. Not at all. No, no, no. Sex was the topic of his day. This was the first time in human history that people were looking at sexuality and trying to understand it. And so we had Sigmund Freud and Richard von Krafft-Ebing, Havelock Ellis in England, Magnus Hirschfeld, who was gay himself, founded the first Institute for Sexuality, totally destroyed when the Nazis took over Germany. But those were the beginnings. In the United States, not until Alfred Kinsey in the 1950s. That's just half a century ago. I was living in those days, where we learned anything at all about sexuality. It had been thought that sex was for procreation, period. That's what it's about. My sense is that people looked at the animals, they saw what they did, and they produced offspring, and their sense was, well, that's what human sex is about. It's for producing babies. But once you add psychology to it, and this is where Freud and those others come in, we begin to realize that human sex is something very, very different from animal sex. It's not just biological, but higher aspects of our humanity, our emotions, our spiritual capacity, that sense of transcendence that I spoke about and that I'm studying as a psychologist. Those things take our biological functions and raise them up into new realms. And what's special about human sexuality is not the biology, it's the interpersonal. It's the connections that we make. I have a line that I use to express this. Sharing sex seduces lovers into weaving dreams and making promises. Sharing sex, the mere physical act of getting with someone, you get hooked. There's something about sex that entangles you. It's an emotional bonding that sets up. You may have seen this. People are lovers, they break up. Every time they get together, they end up in bed again. There's a hooking there. There's a togetherness that's there. Sex is made to do that in human beings. It does not do that in the other animals for the most part. And when you get together, suddenly you start weaving dreams and making promises. What can we make with life? Where will we live? How will we do it? And with children, too, and raising family. Sex in humans is meant to lead from the biological to the emotional to the spiritual. There is a spiritual dimension that is inherent in sex, and the most important part of sex for humans is that spiritual dimension, the interpersonal bonding that results, the unleashing of the love and capacity that's in the individuals to blend together and then overflow into society. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people can do that. They do that as well as heterosexual people. And that's what we're learning when we put the psychological dimension to sex. What is so wonderful about checking the Bible, you find out it didn't disagree with that at all. We just did not understand what it was saying. We read it from our perspective rather than trying to read it from its own. When we read it from its own, it squares very well with this most recent scientific understanding of sex that's only a century old at most. And it's no wonder then there's so much controversy over sexuality. We've learned so much about it in so short a time, and it changes so much of what used to be basic dogma. So sex leads us to weave dreams and make promises. One of the dreams that I've been thinking is that of our global community. And that's why speaking to you in Taiwan is such an amazing experience for me. The dream is that we could all come together, that when we allow individuals to be who they are, and they begin to flourish and blossom. It's not just an individualistic thing. The United States is, we're all into I, just for me, so individualistic. The other cultures, the Chinese culture I know for sure, is much more communitarian. You belong to a group. But those two go together. When we find who we are in ourselves, and the best of what we are comes out in love and caring, it overflows into community, and everyone is enriched. And that is the dream of this third millennium, the dream of a global community. And I'm so grateful that this book, especially in Chinese, may contribute to that dream. Blessings. Thank you. God bless.